I love you're saying all this. And I'm like, yes, And if parents are listening, they'll be like, what's happening? What? And I'm like, this sounds perfectly. That makes, yeah.
I know.
I'm joined down the line by Dermot O'Leary. Hey, Dermot, how you doing?
Hello. Hey, down the line, so much different now. It used to be like you speak to someone on the phone and be
I
pacing
know.
around the room, where now we can see each other, which is so much nicer.
Well, here's a little behind the scenes snippet of how I live my life. I like saying down the line because I think it sounds really cool. That's
Oh,
the only reason I
it
say it.
does sound cool. I was thinking down the line sounds, yeah, I want to say down the line a bit more.
So I have just finished reading your book, which I have right here. This one here.
Thank you. God, that was quick.
Well, it's a great book, so I read it very quickly. I loved it.
Much.
Also, I felt a bit like you'd written it specifically for me.
Correct.
Thank you. Finally. Because I love cats. I love the history of London. And also you wrote about a pond, which is where I visited nearly every day in lockdown in Hampstead Heath.
How funny. Isn't it? Yeah, do you know what? I've been very lucky in that this is the fourth book. And the first book, you sort of find your feet a little bit. And I wanted to write, it's a very simple idea, I think, to start with. I wanted to write a book kind of inspired by my cat, who's blind, but she's got these incredible reactions. So we used to call her Little Ninja. And then so I turned her into essentially a ninja. And I thought then, after I got the first book under my belt, about this crime fighting cat, I thought, well, what sort of world do I want her to inhabit and live in? And I love London, and I've always loved, growing up, I loved all those wonderful kind of movies and books about Victorian London, Celebration Victoriana, whether it's Oliver Twist or My Fair Lady, or and so that's kind of, it's a little nod to that as well. So I wanted to use London as a living, breathing city that animals live in at the same time as we're in. So, for example, I live around the corner from Regent's Park.
Right.
And there are, we've been here about 8 years now, and over the course of those 8 years, the parakeets have gone from, you see a couple maybe once a month, to they are everywhere.
Oh, right.
And so I've got one of my characters, actually in the second book, but I might use him again coming up, is Robert, who is who's a parakeet who lives in a Japanese elm, which is the trees they actually live in Regent's Park. And he's essentially a courier because they can fly so fast. He takes animal messages.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Woodpeckergrams from one place to another for animals. So he appears in one of the early books. So I just wanted to use sort of all of London around and the animals that we find, make them part of a living, breathing city.
Because in this one, you have the ravens from the Tower of London. They're part of it.
Exactly, yeah. So Cyril, who's the head raven, the chief yeoman at the Tower of London in animal form. So I want, the world I've tried to create is that animals live alongside humans, but we just think that pigeons are a flock of pigeons eating some food, and actually, exactly, they're a political party having a chat about and not really deciding about anything. Similarly, the ravens have been there, since the tower began, and there's 24 of them, and they are like essentially they're the SAS. They're an elite kind of squadron of or Spitfires, like let's say they're an elite kind of squadron of fighter pilots who guard the animal crown jewels. And I was lucky enough to do a tour there. Pete, the chief yeoman, gave me a little tour, so I was able to I go and take pictures, and then send those pictures to my illustrator to give him kind of food for thought, really.
Right.
And it just gives me so the combination of going to see Pete at the Tower of London, the Museum of London, which is a terrific museum.
It's the best museum in London. I love it.
So underrated, isn't it? Because it's not in Southwest London where all those other big museums are, those old great Victorian museums. It's in the Barbican, so it's quite a new museum, and yet it gives you a wonderful insight into kind of Victorian and medieval London. Because the way the book's structured, I set it at the start, which was the legend of Dick Whittington and his cat Tom, and obviously the legend is that Tom defeated the rats and wiped out the plague. But I wanted to kind of take that a little stage further. So there's a kind of mystical bracelet or necklace, I suppose, that he would wear that's been broken into two, and there they are, the animal crown jewels, and anyone that owns that necklace essentially is seen by the rat population as a deity, as a god, someone to follow. But Thomas realised that it's a bad thing, so he's put half in the Tower of London and half in an undisclosed location, and it's up to the his direct descendant, who is Larry the 10 Downing Street cat, keep that secret. And then the crown jewels in the Tower of London go missing. Larry gets framed, and then Toto has to kind of almost break the law to try and get a boss out and prove his innocence.
I love you're saying all this, and I'm like, yes, and if parents are listening, they'll be like, what's happening? What? And I'm like, this sounds perfectly. That makes, yeah.
I know.
Out of context.
It's a wonderful. It's a lovely way to create a world and have so much fun with the world. And going back to the ponds at the top of Hampstead, we did a walking tour. We've done a couple of walking tours of London. And they're terrific. And this lovely chap Simon has been our guide twice. And the first one he took us on was a tour of theatrical London, medieval theatrical London, which starts on Blackfriars Bridge and then goes down past the Globe Theatre.
Oh, nice.
And then the second one was up in Hampstead. And I had no idea what that pond was there for, at the very top of Hampstead Hill. And it was there because it was a man-made pond. And at the top of the hill, the carts would go in, the horses would be able to drink, and the carts would cool down. Right. So when they were going down the other side, as I say in the book, when they're going down the other side, it means that their brakes would work because the metal in the brakes hadn't expanded so much.
You must have learned quite a lot for this book.
Wonderful, and that's kind of part of what I enjoy the most about it, to be honest with you, Bex.
I'm going to get you a history GCSE in the post. Get you sorted. No, I honestly did love this book, and I could ask you a lot more questions, but I had a little chat with my friends at Clapham Manor Primary School, and they had questions for you.
Okay, yeah. Great.
I thought I'd ask you some actual kid questions.
Now, hang on. Who do you know there? What's your in with Clapham Manor Primary School?
I'm glad you asked. So I know Miss Sharkey, who teaches English to Year 6s, and I've given her a bunch of books recently, and I said, if you've got any questions that your kids want to ask, let me know. And they got involved.
Miss Sharkey, big shout out to Miss Sharkey and Year 6.
Absolutely. Now the first one, let's see how you go with this. Amaya says, do you have dreams about your neighbour's cat being a ninja?
Presumably she means my cat.
Well, but she's put your neighbour's cat, so
then
I want to...
No, I don't. I mean, I have dreams about Toto and Socks, sort of her adopted baby brother. But last night I was up. I've got a newborn baby, and actually last night I was up five times with the cats because Toto quite likes to jump and play with Socks. Socks likes to jump on Toto and sort of have play fights, and then Toto, bless her, is blind, so she doesn't particularly handle that too well. So then I have to throw him out, and then he meows, and then he goes back in, and then falls asleep. Oh, it was, and most of the time he's good as gold, but last night he was acting up a little bit, so I didn't get much time to dream at all last night.
A feline circus. And Naya says, and I guess we kind of know why, but Naya says, what inspired you to start writing books?
Well, I've always written, because when you work in telly and you write your own scripts and you write ideas for shows and so forth. And but I've always I had a bit more time a few years ago, and I had a couple of ideas, and one idea was based around my cat, and I pitched it to a publisher, and they said we'd quite like it, but go away and work on a chapter plan and all of that, and I did that, brought it back, and then as soon as I started, when I got sort of the 2 thumbs up and okay to do it, as soon as I started doing it, I just fell in love with it, and it's just a really enjoyable process. And it's something similar and very different to what I do normally, because you feel like you're still communicating and you're creating, and that's a lot of fun. But I love the difference in shutting the door and locking yourself away for a whole morning, and it's always morning for me. I like working in the morning, and then having an end product at the end of it. I've interviewed so many musicians down the years, and finally I can kind of relate to that feeling of finishing their album and going, here it is, I want it back, I want it back, I want it back. You kind of back, okay, here it is, it's gone.
Really, it's gone, I've got to get it out.
Yeah, and kids are I wouldn't say the most brutal critics, but they're the most direct, because you write a book and it's very important to you, and the devil's in the detail, obviously. But I think when kids read it and they really absorb it, I get kids coming up to me at book readings and going, in chapter 2 of the second book, when Toto crossed the bridge, was the bridge made out of concrete or wood? And they go, what? I don't know. And in your head you're thinking, wow, this kid knows more about my books than I do, and I wrote them.
Oh yeah, no, kids take it very seriously. You've got
That's
to be
what I
prepared.
love, exactly, and that's kind of, I think, the thing that surprised me most is how uh, pleasantly surprised me the most is how when people come up to me and said our kids didn't read too well up before this, and now we can't stop them reading. That's a really nice thing to hear.
On a similar note, I guess, Natalia says, what's your favourite part of writing books?
Well, it's a good question, Natalia, because they're so different. So I love the early stages that I'm going through now with book 5, where I start to jot down ideas and so forth. And then when I know that I've got the time to write it, then I'll send my ideas in a chapter form or a story arc, what you call a story arc, to my editor. And then, when I get the go ahead for that, then I guess my favorite bit is actually the sort of shutting the door and writing. But then I love touring it afterwards. I love being able to talk about it. I love publication day, which is today, which is always very exciting. So it's a kind of a gift that keeps on giving.
Aris didn't really go down the book route. Aris just says, do you play Fortnite?
No, I've seen it. To be honest with you, I do. I wouldn't. It's not out of principle because I would play it, but I love games. I love gaming, but I quite like gaming on my own. So I quite like the idea of when I was a kid, you'd go around Neil Butler's house and we would play on this old ZX Spectrum, and there'd be four or five of us. And that was actually, I never understand when people say games aren't sociable. I think they're really sociable because, yeah, they're different to books, but they're just as important in many ways. And I used to love my gaming time with my mates, but I quite like to immerse myself in. I love the escapism of it, so I quite like to immerse myself in a world of like a big long story arc of a game. And at the moment, obviously with a kid and so forth, it's quite difficult to do any of that. So
yeah, probably not top of your priority list.
Yeah, that's kind of on hold right now. I can't really turn around to my wife and go, "I'm just going to go play PlayStation for 2 hours." Is that all right?
She'd be like, yeah, of course, go. That seems totally fine and normal and reasonable. Yeah, of course. Well, Dermot, thank you so much for chatting to us. I know you're super busy, so really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. I really like it. So thank you. It's been nice to chat.
Yeah, likewise. And for the 5th book, hopefully I will see you in person.
Absolutely.
Fingers crossed.